that he was imagining. Now, and fans reacted in a variety of ways as to whether they liked that twist or thought it was sort of silly. But some fans pointed out, well, look, St. Elsewhere had crossover episodes with other shows, namely Cheers, Homicide, and the Bob Newhart Show. All had these connections. And so fans started saying, well, if St. Elsewhere is all in the mind of Tommy Westphall, aren't all those other shows also in the mind of Tommy Westphall? So they created a map. This is the map of the Tommy Westphall television universe, and as of now, the grid lists 282 programs that fans claim took place in Tommy's mind, ranging from I Love Lucy to The Wire. Now, and just to give you a little close-up here, here's a zoom in and someone else's visualization of that theory. It's a lot of fun, and if you search for it online, you'll also find sort of very detailed philosophical arguments as to why this is not true. So it becomes a really interesting example, because I don't believe anyone who spends their time in Tommy Westphall universe theories, proving or disproving, believes that it's a coherent theory, but rather it's a sort of fun play as if. As if this were true, or true at least within the realm of fiction, what would this mean? What would the implications mean? So, I think that this highlights one of the interesting aspects of fandom, of any popular culture, but especially of serial popular culture, is that fans engage in practices that are playfully ludicrous. Not because they believe it to be true, but because they enjoy pretending that it is true, or playing as if this were a fun way to imagine the sort of extension of their favorite story worlds. Okay. And I think we can see, this may be kind of imagined as a precursor to phenomena like alternate reality games that are sort of predicated on players having this sort of as-if mentality of, I know that these fake websites that I'm trying to decode are not real, but I pretend that they are in order to have fun. And I think this way of sort of playful pretend is really important and pervasive in a lot of these paratexts. Okay, third, characters. A lot of these shows have vast casts of characters, and it can be hard work to keep track. I mean, The Wire is a good example. Dozens of characters over the 5 seasons. Many are only known as their nicknames. Many are unseen for episodes at a time. So there are character guides. Both the official, the one on the left is from HBO's website, where it gives you sort of information and little bios and pictures of each character, or unofficial. This is from Wikipedia, that has sort of a vast guide to every character and every actor and sort of what episodes they appear in and the like. The goal of these is to link faces and names and dramatic functions in fans' imagination. So just remember, this is who. And I think that this is really useful, especially on The Wire, where it can be very, very confusing. And I know that I've found, when I've taught the show and had students watch it for the first time, they really need guides to make sense of who is who at a given time. The second level are character analyses, trying to understand, so who are these people and why do they matter? And this a lot has to do with relationships. So sometimes this is, again, an official guide that you might find on a DVD or on a website that kind of maps character relationships. Lost DVDs had a really interesting kind of character map where you can click on a character and then see their links to other characters and their flashbacks and the like. But fans do this as well. So here's a fan-created Lost character map where there are color-coded links between images of each of the characters to try to say this is who's related, who's in a romantic relationship, who are friends, who are antagonists, etc. Another more playful example is this one from Battlestar Galactica, where people try to map the different characters and sort of where they are in different moments, who comes in at different times, and then at the bottom you can see the fan has put a line that says "My respect" that dwindles as the show goes on. As a form of fan critique built into seemingly other analytical practices. And I think this is important, that a lot of these analyses have a degree of critical praise or sort of otherwise sort of critique that are built into them. I don't know why that slide is there, sorry. And then the third is expansion. So the idea that you can expand characters across or outside of their story world. I mean, the way in which that's most common is certainly with things like fan fiction, where fans will write a fictional piece or create a remix video that place one character in another character's story world and make those connections. Now, I don't think that's orientation practices per se, because they're really not aimed at kind of making sense of the narrative world, but rather sort of creating it as a way to generate new stories. The best example of character expansion I've found actually maps a kind of fun case of intertextuality that takes an element from a popular American role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons. I don't know if it had any sort of play here in the Netherlands, but it was a role-playing game that used an alignment system. This idea is that each character has these it has a place in a moral universe of two axes, good to evil and lawful to chaotic. And the idea was that each character belongs somewhere on this grid. And fans have said, hey, let's use this to map characters. So here you can see Arrested Development's characters, Mad Men's characters, and my favorite is The Wire. And the interesting thing about The Wire one is that fans in the comments on this, on the guy who created this on his blog, got into really big debates of, what is Omar? Is Omar really true neutral, or is he chaotic good, or what are, is he lawful neutral? What are the different factors in play here, and trying to understand it. So here you have this case of again, a playful way of exploring the text, but also that leads to real analytical conversation of who are these characters and how do they relate and connect with sort of these different codes and our moral assumptions. Finally, spatial orientation. And this obviously is what maps are usually used for, most of all. But I think that space is the dimension of television that needs the least outside help for viewer comprehension. I'd say that in the rise of complex television, temporality, plotting, and characterization have become very complex, and space has not become as complex. There's little sense of a show's geography being an important element of its complexity. Now, that's not to say that shows can't have complex geography insofar as they take place in a sort of a rich, vibrant story world. I mean, Lost Island is an example of a fantasy story world, or The Wire's Baltimore as a real story world, or a reality-based story world in which the geography really matters and is done very precisely. But I think that there's not a sense of spatial play and spatial ornamentation the way that you get with the other three elements as much. And if anything, I think in a lot of shows, space is the storytelling element that producers are willing to cheat on more than others. So 24 is a good example. It's a show that, again, as I mentioned, is predicated on its chronology in its very name, and it's willing to cheat geography in favor of chronology. So if you know anything about Los Angeles and you watch that show and you say, really, Jack Bauer crossed town in an hour? No way. The traffic here. That there's no way that the real time could ever, be able to sort of traverse that geography. And so because of that, there's a sense of, okay, well, it's a conceit. We're more interested in having real-time chronology than making sure that our representation of LA is fully geographically accurate. Nonetheless, especially for fantasy worlds, fans do invest themselves in orienting themselves. And in this way, I think it's very similar to the way in which Tolkien's fantasy novels have maps at the beginning. And you often are sort of referencing those maps to remember, okay, so the Fellowship is traveling here. This is where they are at this point. I think a good example of this, internal to a show, is Game of Thrones. The series has a really wonderful credit sequence that is a sort of animated map that changes every episode to reference, this is where we are in this episode. So it's very much an orientation, a pre-orientation of this is where we're going to be. And it helps set the stage in storytelling of the relationships in space, but also to anticipate, okay, we are sort of not focusing on that plot line in this episode. You know that going in. Some paratexts go outside the show itself. So, for instance, this is an officially produced and sanctioned map, poster-sized map of the Battlestar Galactica cosmos, the 12 colonies of Kobol. Now, I don't think that, studying this map gives you great insight to the narrative necessarily, but it does create a sense of this is a fully realized world, even though we're not seeing most of it. We spend no time on most of these places in the show, but it's a way of the producers saying, we have a sense of this world that goes beyond what we see on the show. And then fans will take this upon themselves when the shows themselves don't provide it. So Star Trek fandom is certainly one of the key innovators here. These are 2 books that were published in the 70s that tried to map Star Trek. And this is part of a larger trend that media scholar Bob Rayhack has called blueprint culture, as a certain form of affirmative fandom where fans try to sort of get technically accurate and sort of scientifically precise renderings of fantastic fictions, which is a very interesting phenomenon. Now, for programs that are based here on Earth, I think the most valuable tool is Google Maps. And both fans and production teams have used Google Maps in interesting ways. So take, for instance, Seinfeld, which is a really interesting case. It was set in New York City very prominently, but it was filmed in Los Angeles. But the narrative experience is very predicated on the sense of this is in New York, and New York has geography. So both Sony, the show's production studio, and fans created their own Seinfeld-themed Google Maps. So the one on the left is Sony's, and it's flashier. And if you click on one of these things, you can get little video clips of the scenes that take place at these different places in New York. But the fan side is much more comprehensive, over I think twice as many locations. Now, these can then extend into embodied practice. So there's this whole sort of very popular realm of television tourism, where you go to a place and explore the geography of the often filming locations. So you can go to Hawaii and see Lost. You can go to New Jersey and get the Sopranos tour. Or Mad Men has a time machine tour that you can sort of go through and see places that are referenced on the show, obviously not in the 60s, though. I think the Seinfeld case here is also very interesting because even though it was shot almost exclusively in LA, there is a New York-based Seinfeld tour that is run by Kenny Kramer. Kenny Kramer was the neighbor of Larry David, one of the show's creators, who was the inspiration for the character of Kramer. And he takes you around New York on a bus to see the real places that inspired Seinfeld's fictional version of the city. And it's very strange to imagine going on a tour of a real city based on its fictional representation, being guided by a real person who is the inspiration for a fictional character. So a lot of levels of meta there that that have to be played out. Now again, I don't think that these are help our comprehension of the series themselves, but rather extend the experience beyond the series. And for fans, this is obviously a key element in all of these practices. It's a way to spend more time caring about these narratives, whether it's the places or the people or the events. And an interesting case of mapping is in a series is Lost, because it has a really interesting set of parameters involved. It's a fantasy setting, a fictitious island, and the geography of that island is central to the show. I mean, much of